Well, I mean, like, I never looked at it from that, I know it's that.
It's literally right off my.
My goal is to get online from the
Out there, you know, each
Yeah.
chat. That's kind of looking.
Well, I say.
Just laying there the whole time.
There's no space.
Yeah.
This year.
Recruiter. Oh, are we talking about that study later?
Well, like with the other slides. And I go, I space. And I'll see. What do you mean,
Are we still, are we gonna try to do it at 6 then?
You know, that was talk up on the.
Yeah, that's just fair.
No, go ahead, I'll just leave you.
I also couldn't do 6, but if you guys wanted to meet at 6, I'll also leave on an extra.
Can't do 6.
Well, because I have to be next.
I thought you said 8.
Oh, I mean,
Mr. You 8 o'clock.
I'll make it work. It's like. Wouldn't even matter anyway.
You guys want me?
It's for the.
No, I know. I don't know why.
Hmm,
You want to roll one?
Maybe.
yeah.
No, I got him. I got him.
I did not even pass a letter. I would get it back. No, we make it.
Hey. sometimes I think I do it. Oh. I might.
Yeah, I really did not need to try.
You want a battery?
But yours doesn't work. What's that? It just likes more than the battery. Unless somebody has like a detachable.
No.
Right. Mhm.
Like it's the.
Yeah.
Doesn't work for me. Let's see if I want to. Idea.
Usually Oregon. University of Oregon.
Also, would be the 12-year-old like less than 2 mornings, it says the master.
It's very central.
See states going to the state.
So, I will do a thing on the Omni channel tomorrow. And that will finish up. The test will be Wednesday afternoon to Friday afternoon. So it will go online, I would say like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it'll close, well, I'll make it Saturday. You know, nothing better on a Friday night than to do it. So, we will finish today talking about channels. I will do also some discussion on promotion. Tuesday, we'll talk about the omni-channel and its unique place. And then we'll start into the next chapters. But where the test ends is going to be ending on chapter 6. So make sure that you separate those in your mind. Okay, so we talked about the basic structure of channels. We talked about that it started with, we either call them the manufacturer. We could also call them the producers, but let's just keep it easy and we'll just call them manufacturers. The middle group are intermediaries, and then the ending is the consumer. And why do we conclude the consumer in channels? Somebody tell me.
They perform certain functions.
Oh, man, it makes you so much better than undergrads, you know? When, yes. Because, you know, I mean, it seems like I have to hammer that into my students. You know, consumers are part of the channel functions. As a matter of fact, there's significant evidence that says the greater amount of control and even the greater amount of requirements or allowances that we give to the channel, to the consumers, the greater value that they find the whole overall experience. The omni-channel was written about sometime around 2006, just as a concept and idea, as a theory, but it didn't really break out until there was a device that could practically manage that. And that's ultimately where the smartphones came in. All of these ideas are ideas that came to fruition, found the perfect point, and like a crystalline structure, which becomes super saturated and forms in an instant, that's how we came about with the omni-channel. So a couple of other things just quickly. I also wanted to talk again so that I do this because I was in a hurry on Friday. I want to make sure that there are ideas that I don't just kind of toss away. So the specialized intermediaries, as I said before, generally we're talking about wholesalers. We talk about retailers. And then we talk about specialized intermediaries, okay? Okay. So wholesalers do not sell to the end user, whereas retailers sell to the end users, but their functions are very similar. So how do we know what is a wholesale and what is a retail? I'm going into Staples and I am buying a ream of paper, which is 500 sheets. And I'm going to do that to be able to create playbills for the Blue Ridge Community Theater to be handed out before the production. This would be a wholesale sale because it is consumed in the use of another product. Whether that is a product or a service or an event or an experience, in essence, that is a contribution to something higher along the line. Let's say I go into Staples again, I buy a ream of paper, and I buy that for my daughter to be able to do drawing on. That is a retail sale, all right? And for a retail sale, it is the consumer use for personal consumption. And so what is the key factor between these two? It comes down to this. What is the buying motive? And this is the key phrase. The buying motive ultimately is the determination whether or not a sale is a retail or a wholesale, one or the other. Now, Staples, Office Depot, stores like that generally sell anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of all of their sales for wholesale purposes, all right? But for all practical purposes, they're built to function and work in the same way. Because once again, how does a Staples or an Office Depot know what the buying motive is? That's up to the ultimate consumers, which one it's used for, okay? So this is how to determine which one. Now, specialized intermediaries, we already talked about that, is that they tend to perform one function in the marketing channels functions that they perform. One function. They also have a tendency not to be part of the channel stream. So in other words, they function as a particular process, but they may take goods, they may even take title, but they are necessary to the process, but they themselves are not the process. It's kind of hard to talk about that way. Just realize that they perform very unique functions that without, you simply could not perform the job. So I talked about an example was I talked about Westinghouse and I talked about GE Capital, what they do in their performance. They create the ability to have those processes financed that ultimately without, they would not simply succeed. So I started when I got my way through college. One of the things that I did when I was in Mississippi is I worked offshore and I worked with oil field supply houses. And as a matter of fact, when I first started out, and there were very few jobs, I worked in Morgan City for 2 years. Morgan City is a small town that's in Louisiana. It tends to be southwest Louisiana, near where Lafayette is. A very much oil field town built around those particular, their function and their abilities. And they used to have there something that was known as hotshot trucking. So I do not know if you've ever heard of hotshots, but basically hotshot's a very unique niche and a niche that has to do with just shipping. So there's two types of platforms that work offshore. You have the drilling platform in which that's offshore and their basic function is to be able to go out and try to find oil where it exists offshore. Back in my day, 1 out of 7 is considered successful. Quite simply, the technology they did not have available. Now, 6 out of 7, they know where they're going when they do their drilling. A company like Conoco and Exxon, as I remember telling you, if you remember me telling you a couple of days ago, one of the things that you want to do if you're a company is focus only on the things that you do and everything else you rent out. So you focus on your key concepts. So companies like Exxon and Conoco, all of those corporations, they don't own the drilling platforms that they used to drill with. Those are owned by corporations like Halliburton, Harima, which is a gigantic Dutch firm. They actually rent these particular platforms. They don't own them, It's an idea actually that came from Howard Hughes, his company, or excuse me, his family in 1905, when oil started coming big, came up with the brilliant concept of renting tools instead of having corporations buy them. So oil field platforms, depending on their complexity and how far out, rent from anywhere from $500,000 a day to somewhere around $3 to $5 million a day when we're talking about drilling ships that have to perform miles out, all right? Very specialized kind of work. Imagine what it would be like if just one hose went bad. Just consider that as an option and there was no substitute. 3 or 4 days could build up debts in the millions while hundreds of people are sitting waiting for one particular hose to come in. And so this is where the concept of hotshot trucking came in. So what hotshot trucking is it's a 24-hour service that is built to be able to deliver a good at a particular moment, at a particular time. And this is one of those very unique niches in marketing where money is absolutely no object whatsoever, where time is more important than money, and also speeding tickets, okay? So I've done hotshot trucking before. I've been told by my boss, I'll pay for your tickets. And I said, will you pay for the points on my license? And he said, get out of here and go deliver it, okay? So I would do it. This is an example of a specialized intermediary, and we're talking about a really specialized intermediary as well. One where delivery is important, but delivery has no value whatsoever unless it's here to be able to put on a helicopter and be able to get out. By the way, they rent helicopters for about $55,000 a day. That doesn't include the fuel. So it gives you an idea of the dynamics of what goes on. Okay, so manufacturers, intermediaries, and then finally the consumer, and the consumer performs channel functions. All right, so now the key things to recognize in channel environments is 2 things. The corporations are independent, which means they have their own mission statement, their own goals, their own objectives, but they are also interdependent. Which means they rely on each other for success. Without each other, they cannot survive. And so with these skewed kinds of things, we come up with unique properties in which you worry about things like conflict. And conflict is a very real thing when you're talking about marketing channels. I would urge any of you, if you've got a chance to take a class in negotiation, it is an important and maybe even a more essential thing to the success in your career. I would, if you got a chance also to take a class in leadership. The very last class in my life, now anyway, so I had a minor in psychology. And the last class I ever took was in leadership psychology. And I swear to you, I wish it was the first class I ever took, because I could understand then what my superiors, what are the things that drive them and why they make decisions that I consider to be confusing. It is to your advantage. That's all I can say. Well, one of the concepts that's important for you to understand when we're talking about conflict is to first, let's start with an understanding of what is known as power. So for any of you who are in industrial organizational psychology, you recognize that power is a very real thing that moves in and out of the circles of organizations. And that power has a purpose if it's used for good. And how do we determine good? In 1994, Walmart started the vendor management system. It comes under many, many different names. Walmart wanted to be able to have a way to more closely coordinate the movement of goods through the entire Walmart environment. They insisted upon the vendors that they had at the time that they must spend anywhere to $5,000 to $15,000 on a computer infrastructure for them to be able to succeed as a Walmart vendor. As a matter of fact, you quite simply could not be one. But Walmart gave the vendors one particular tool. Walmart gave the vendors the ability to see every single product on every single shelf, on every single Walmart store in the world, real time, 24 hours a day. So that's what they gave to them. This is also vendor management systems where the vendors managed the goods was inside the Walmart environment. Now think about it. That is a enormous breach in security if you think about it, and it requires an enormous amount of trust. On the flip side of that, this demand by Walmart to force their vendors to do this could be considered possibly an erosion of trust. But here's the key thing about the use of power. The use of power is successful when it provides system-wide success. Walmart pitched to their vendors that it doesn't just bring success to Walmart, it brings success to the vendors and that everybody succeeds. And so the ability to use power successfully depends on whether or not it is for the good of everything or just the good for myself. And so, long story getting longer, excuse me, Walmart's system is now one of the mainstays when it comes to what we consider to be successful, okay? So, we're gonna go with what they have here as the power in the supply chain. Because there's also one that's called legal and logistic power, but we're gonna kind of pass that up. And this is where that goes. So anyway, there are two types of power. One is known as personal power. And another that is known as position power, all right? It is basically your place in the system that gives you the strength that you have. And so, let's start off with reward power and coercive power, all right? They are position powers, and so is legitimate power, okay? So, let us look at legitimate power first. Legitimate power is spread out into actually two types. One is called legal legitimate. And the other is known as traditional legitimate. All right? Legal legitimate has to do with contracts and formal documents. Okay? That are created by the firm's position which we must maintain and what we ourselves sign. Traditional legitimate has to do with society norms. You will pay your bills. One of my dad's mantras to the moment of his death was debts must be paid. It doesn't matter, all right? You know, everything that he went through in his life came down to the fact that you need to pay your bills. Because that basically proves what kind of a person you are. If you're willing to accept that your debts are yours and you have to pay them. Legal legitimate power is it comes down to we signed a contract and I expect you to be able to fulfill these. So I'm going to give an example of both. So 1999, I created an internet service providership. I owned it, started it. I was in a small town called Columbia, Mississippi. I grew to about 1,800 subscribers. I started having like 80. This is when DSL was just starting, high-speed customers as well. 2004, Walmart comes along and drops their dial-up price, because this is when dial-up was predominant, from $18.95 a month to $4.95 a month. In essence, they kicked the legs out from under me, all right? I had about 1,800 customers. Like I said, I was generating about $42,000 a month in revenue. I was really high on the hog. Walmart comes along and I'm done. I mean, so I dropped from 1,800 customers to around 1,200 in less than 6 months. I call up South Central Bell at that time and I say, we've got to redo our contracts because I'm simply not going to survive. The South Central Bell, which was part of, well, it's AT&T now, quite simply said, you signed a contract, you put your name on there, you know, we expect you to pay. It got to be a pretty bad experience. I was getting calls day and night, telling them to pay my bills. I started to incur a debt of over $130,000. I was at the very brink. And so out of desperation, I went to my attorney. I should have went to him earlier. The guy's name was Forrest Stanton. Forrest was a great guy. He was actually the city judge of Columbia at the time, but he practiced in the county as well. Forrest was, if you ever want to see a pillar of a community, that was what Forrest was. In many ways, I admired the man. I almost aspired to be him. But I basically, he was my attorney and I gave him free high-speed internet. So that's how we traded services, okay? Good guy. So I poured my soul out to him and just told him what was going on. And Forrest just kind of sat there and listened for about 5 minutes, which good attorneys will do. And he finally looked at me and said, F him. Forrest was a deacon of a church. Forrest doesn't use those words. I mean, and so my first thought was why? And then the other part of that is he's saying that for effect. He said, David, I put together your contracts. I know what's in them. You own nothing. You're just a member of the company. And that's the way I wrote it. The debt goes to the corporation and not to you. Go find something else to do with your life, close your business and walk off. And that's exactly what happened. Okay. You know, I sold my corporation, was at that crisis moment in my life. These letters came from my former chair of my department congratulating me. I realized that for 20 years I had been doing one thing, and that's education, you know, when it came to IT. And this is where I am. All right. So this is where my second life came. This is an example of legal legitimate power, which said, or excuse me, traditional legitimate power, which says you have to pay your bills, which was what they were hammering me with, and legal legitimate power that said I had absolutely no reason to pay these off. And so that got written off after 3 years, and here I am. So this is something to take with you. Reward power is the ability to help others or to be able to reward people when they reach certain goals. The problem with reward power is that it tends to be never ending. So when I tell my daughter, if you'll do your homework, you get a cookie. The next night she says, I've done my homework, so where's my cookie? And so reward power has to be doled out in very careful kinds of instances. Coercive power is not the flip side of reward power. It's the same thing that dissatisfaction is not the same thing as satisfaction. Coercion is the ability to make negative outcomes upon members, or by either taking the power, positive outcomes away, or to punish them. And the problem, of course, with coercive power is it's a call to action. You know, people are stunned when you use coercive power and find that the response back is, oh yeah, I mean, it is natural for people to feel that way. And so coercive power has to be done as a last moment. So personal power or information and referent come down to two things. Okay. Personal power, information power is when you have knowledge of sales and research. You, in essence, invest in yourself in education so that you have a superior idea of what's going on. The problem with information power, and this is one of my big weaknesses, is I love for everybody to see how smart I am, and I would give up what I knew and not get charged for it, okay? So information power needs to be doled out very carefully. Don't give away what you've worked so hard to be able to have. And so just a suggestion, okay? And then the last is referent power, is the desire and the willingness to be able to be branded with one other particular group. You want to be known as being a friend of that person. And so these powers are very huge in the supply chain business. And so in the use of power, okay, invariably, you have the problem of the concept, let's see, do they? No, they don't. Of conflict. Conflict. Conflict is a state of opposition between two parties. Conflict happens whenever there are differences in opinion, whether they are stated or unwise or otherwise not. And conflict occurs in everyday life. And for those of you who are going to take on the very hard jobs in the future, expect it. Conflict comes from the Latin word confligere, which means to collide. But conflict is not necessarily bad. So let me see if I can get this to work. Okay. So I happen to love old TV shows, mainly because I'm an old TV shows. Anyway, so there is a TV show called Perry Mason. Perry Mason was created by Earl Stanley Gardner. And Perry Mason is in its essence the ideal attorney, the attorney who gives his soul to his particular clients and will do whatever he can to succeed. But one of the things that makes Perry Mason such a great show to watch is because of this man as well. This man was known, his name is William Talman. He played Hamilton Berger, and he was the district attorney that Perry Mason had to go against. Hamilton Berger, they had definite disagreements with each other, but during the show, there were many times when Hamilton would immediately change and he would side with Perry. So let me see if I still have these clips running. I hope I do. So this is kind of a montage of Hamilton Berger objecting to Perry Mason.
Counsel for defense is up to his usual grandstand. Objection. Your Honor, once again, Mr. Mason is demonstrating his characteristic courtroom pirate techniques.
Your Honor, it's perfectly obvious that Mr. Mason's been up to one of his usual tricks.
Oh, Your Honor, I object. That's incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial. It's also improper cross-examination. I object, Your Honor. This is improper cross-examination. It's incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial, in that it assumes a fact not in evidence.
Objected to is argumentative, assuming a fact not in evidence, leading and suggestive, and utterly incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial. Sustained.
So, kind of gives you an idea what goes on in the courtroom. But there's one episode where Hamilton had a friend of his who saved his life, and he actually asked Perry to represent him. Literally, they had a private conversation, and he said, you know, Perry, I don't know if it where merits you're looking, but if you find any reason to it, and Perry says, sure, I'll do it, Hamilton, even if he did save your life. Okay. So anyway, the whole courtroom scene, Hamilton was not the DA because conflict of interest, but he was in the courtroom cheering Perry. All right. And so this is the ending.
You know, I think I won this case.
So how can two individuals who have such sharpened knives at each other find some way to have friendship, which they actually did? Because Perry and Hamilton were after the same thing, justice, all right? And so the moral of all of this basically is that conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict can be good. Conflict turns over things, gets rid of the old grandfather stuff that should have been gone a long time ago. You know, sometimes it takes a few sharp elbows to be able to get things moving. Now, functional conflict requires trust, but without having trust, you do not have a successful channel environment. And so you have two types of conflict. A good one, which is functional conflict, which are disagreements which lead to successful you can say endpoints or successful evaluations. You could just say general success if you want to. And the bad kind, which is really the worst, is what's known as manifold. And this is conflict that leads to behaviors that damage relationships. Okay. So in functional conflicts, you have the willingness to be able to listen to another person's opinion. Functional conflicts move the process between groups. It can actually help things and make things better. Actually, that's the whole point of it. It is the acceptance and the understanding that conflict exists, and you find some ways to deal with these things. Manifest conflict is when there's open behavior in which you deliberately try to damage your channel partner. So as I've talked about before, Apple and Samsung have this, have this love-hate relationship that's been going on forever. 3 of the major chips that are inside the Apple iPhones come from Samsung. And yet they both file patents against each other. And then quite simply, this love-hate relationship quite comes down to the one major reason why is quite simply is they can't do without each other. I mean, success only happens through their agreements. Manifest conflict, however, that is where one group deliberately tries to damage another. It becomes part of organizational memory. And so what it means is that when one new individual comes in, they say, you don't want to deal with those people. You can't trust them. And then that's what's bad. But conflict is important. So one final note is, how do you handle conflict? You accept it exists. And you create structures to handle. In other words, you institutionalize conflict. This is the example where you have mediations, negotiations. You have the ability to finding some way to be able to work within the system so that these can be taken care of. So baseball players, this is just a quick example, baseball players before 1968, in essence, their careers were the possession of the baseball teams that they played for. They did not have the ability to move back and forth, one to the other. After 1968, for the St. Louis Cardinals, there was a very brave baseball player by the name of Curt Flood. And Curt Flood in 1968-69 filed for the possibility of free agency. What this meant is where we are now, to have the ability to be able to move from one team to another. It cost Curt Flood his career. But in 1972 and finally to 75, baseball decided to have free agency, just in its beginnings. In 92, fast forward, they had another baseball strike in which they lost 100 games during the season. The baseball players were never able to get what they wanted. And in desperation, Marvin Miller, who was the attorney of the baseball players, asked for third-party arbitration. So arbitration is where you give one individual, usually the judge, you bring them, your cases, both of you, to the judge, and you allow the judge to make a decision for you that is legal and binding. Anybody want to guess how the baseball players went out after that? How it went? Who won in that?
The baseball players.
You bet. The baseball players made out like bandits, okay? Because they had been having their careers and their money stunted for years. That's part of the NIL, name, image, and likeness things, is that student athletes for years had their particular image being able used by universities, but they were not able to, be able to collect on that. Rule of thumb, folks, management and labor, if that ever goes to a judge, it's winner take all. that's what the judges say. So from 1992 to 2010, baseball had the highest salary growth of any other professional sport. But not only them, but worldwide soccer. Oh my God, basketball, football, they all could, until about 2010, where finally it started tipping the other way. And so now management says, we'll see you at the table because they're not, but anyway, it worked out. And so this is one of the ways that we go about and handle these kind of limitations, okay? All right, so power, conflict, which ultimately, hopefully will lead to some kind of superior relationships. And so these are the drivers that happen within channel systems. So, what are the trends that we see right now in supply chain? I'm going to touch briefly on a couple of them. And the first one is to talk about RFID, and RFID has been around forever. RFID is radio frequency identification. It is the ability to be able to put a little sticker on a particular group of materials or product and have that good literally be scanned without human intervention. This has been tried many places and many times. Walmart has tried to roll this out multiple times. So what is the brave new world of RFID? The brave new world of RFID is where you would be able to take a basket full of goods, your shopping cart, with all of your goods, run through two RFID stands and have everything immediately calculated and totaled up so that you grab the receipt on the way out because your credit card is already in the system, right? Now, they've tried this many times in many places, but unfortunately, they're still not the perfect thing yet, right? Yes.
You erase the stuff that's on.
Oh, Mike, I'm sorry. Yeah. I tend to write over stuff, so forgive me if you need me to do that, let me know. Okay, sorry. So, RFID, radio frequency identification. It has been thought of as the brave new world. I don't know if they're ever going to get around to where they actually have some success. Of course, GPS monitoring, we all know what that is, global positioning satellites, where the ability to be able to track things across the timeline or a given area are considered one of those major goals. The other is to recognize outsourcing and to understand outsourcing. Remember, for me to go back and discuss with you, what are your core functions? What are the major components or what considers you to be your core competency? Outsourcing comes under the idea that someone, especially third-party logistics providers, can do the manufacturing and the shipping for you much better than you can in the idea generation. The problem with outsourcing, of course, is that some corporations do not consider, how should I put this? Do not consider that there's any such thing as a corporate secret, all right? And so it is not unusual for manufacturers, when they're given a design product, to either take those designs and sell them somewhere else or to put them out on the open market somewhere. So in the 70s, my father was a pilot on the Mississippi River. He had friends that were pilots as well. One of them was a gentleman by the name of Captain Fonda, and a corporation in Hong Kong bought 4 LNGs. LNGs are liquefied natural gas. They're gigantic ships that store natural gas in these enormous tanks at, not absolute zero, of course, but at many degrees below, zero. And they're stored in a liquefied state, all right? LNG technology is very specialized. So what happened was Captain Fonda delivered the four of them, okay? Delivered four. So the first one he delivered to the corporation, and he went back to get the next one. And what the first thing that they did was take that ship apart piece by piece, spent a year or two understanding it. They delivered the second ship and then canceled the contract for the remaining two. And then in five years, they started building their own LNGs, okay? There's the danger of outsourcing your technology, especially when knowledge, once it's generally shared, no longer gives you a competitive advantage, all right? You must guard your secrets as well as you can. And so, outsourcing is valuable but dangerous. We also have a concept known as nearshoring now, where instead of building hundreds and thousands of units, there's some nearshoring groups in North Carolina. And basically what nearshoring allows you to do is it came about from one particular technology that's known as the 3D printer. The 3D printer now allows you to be able to design from concept all the way up to the creation of an object without having an official model first. And so what nearshoring also allows you to do is instead of making 10,000 in order to be economically viable, you can make 50, right? So there's several of these in Raleigh that especially like, I can give an example of the music industry. The music industry with their specialized equipment can now be built in smaller lots, one at a time, where you don't ultimately give up your particular, strength. And so in terms of the trends of supply chain, of course, it's a global world, all right? We're reaching into greater locations. Retailing is spread across the world, but ironically, wholesaling tends to be local because it requires unique knowledge in those particular locations. The technology has spread out, but it is still in its infancy stage and it hasn't been able to get over some of the major pains. And we don't have to look at COVID, the blocking of the Suez Canal, and then ultimately the Francis Scott Key Bridge disaster to know the difficulties when you have a long supply chain, all right? And so there is the tendency of outsourcing, but outsourcing closer to home. And yes, contingency and crisis plans are more important. Not like I'm a predictor person, but I said basically that I didn't think I didn't think the Francis Scott Key Bridge was going to be as bad as it was, because I felt like we've had a lot of slack shipping abilities since after COVID, and sure enough, I was right. You had about a bump of 2 weeks. Didn't matter. All right, I'm gonna take a break for 5 minutes. We will come back and talk about IMC. And yeah, so I'll be right back, folks. So go take a break.
Really? Not, or not last night. Really bad. Oh my God.
What?
Yeah, it's like. Before that. But it was gonna be like 6.
Sorry now, wake up early tomorrow,
Yeah.
go fish, I went and bought flies, and then 9 a.m. rolled around.
What?
Guess we're going to church.
Yeah, it was, I mean, it was cloudy, chilly, and way on that.
Is that reception? This pistachio. Or red.
I don't know what, I'm tired. This is. You like to cook? Yeah, I make the assumption. You always. I think there's like. Ah, okay. Yes, one has to be the other. Yeah. That's what. Up here? It's not just, her name is Astrid. I don't mind. Like she didn't get. It's so hard to get pictures of black dogs. She just blends into everything. Like you almost can't even tell she's there. My dog backbone is black. Sweet, that's what. Oh. Usually. That's shit too. Yeah. Usually pictures of looks of that. It's good when you do realm back. Yeah. Yes, I'll do that video. Yeah. That's the neighbor. Well, I love a good house. That way you build. Yeah. My first good friends from high school. Doing has be a lot. I will also think there's such good films. One is so late. I was worried about him getting it, because I was like, yeah, Husky
I was
Pepper,
just gonna
like
email
loud,
her.
so energetic, but he just sticks on. Same though, because my friend, his first husky. He expected, like, to go out, yelling.
Let's just pretend.
Literally never, like, just silent dog. And then he ended up still getting lost. So we lost our hand. His new dog, same thing. His obvious little husky. Unless you don't feed him on time, then he gets a little. Not even like. See, we got a mud. We got big old. They didn't take this name back. Oh, and that's her. No way. We're doing some more. This is being. I thought it'd be, if I got like a bunch of dogs, it'd be funny to name them all after beans. I think if they get worse as we go, but like Pinto and
I bet you beat her.
Garbanzo.
Who is?
Bean, it's the good name.
They are,
Jelly,
yeah.
some of those
Just
are good
don't need
names.
compensation.
And then if you get like 8 or more, then you just have to like sort of like refried. Okay, but like that's the right way to go.
He's,
See, we
we
did.
don't know.
Um,
He's that station.
her name was Papaya when we got her. We did a lot of want a fruit name. We were like, but like we don't really eat papaya. It's not like fruit. It's really like gotta find something. We spent the entire like. It's like all, it's like vegetables, everything. And then it's a really big fan of dragon. There, so landed on that and it's stuck.
I get to see
So,
a couple,
that's where we
every
ended
once in
up.
a while it'll show me like. Otherwise, it's
See,
like, oh, from
our next thing will probably
my,
be.
my both Lincoln saw each other, but we didn't catch.
And it's not gonna have a name at all. It's gonna be something completely random. Cause like, I feel like cats just do better. One of our good friends, cat's name. Oh, yeah, I remember you saying that. They found her in the trash. You're hoping to be able to stay over. And she is.
7 hour to meet you.
As soon as you open the door, she's just standing at the stairs. I mean,
That's the fun.
you would not expect it either. And then she runs up to you, she pets you, and then as soon as she's done, she wake up. She doesn't use her claws, she just like whack you out. But then she immediately gets right back into it. Mhm. She's an interesting cat.
But I was like,
I've been in a state of that had a lot more files.
What are their?
It looks like a eating file, but it actually is a chain.
what's that?
What's those are,
No.
Not a bit. Right?
I think 2 years experience. You get out. That's practically entry level. He gives us a.
For 6 months.
Are there?
Right, like you have experience.
No. Let's get us one more to the end, like, you know, make us go one more day. Actual class on the 4th.
Writing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's right.
Well,
Writing weird books about work romance, they're oddly specific.
Very uncomfortable. I get on my shoulder.
That would be wild.
Anything but that.
Well, I think I was angry.
Here's all the fruits. No, I didn't.
What?
Long curly hair. I did not do that. Ooh, what? I'm scared. Yeah. Well, I already was.
I know. Hey. Do you?
What is it? It's on my.
I'm just like a little worried that are they gonna go under in the next 5 years?
All I get is. Wow. Yeah. And drove back this morning. I called him. Literally got it. Yeah. Oh, she's 3 months. She's just at the age where she started. Get to sleep.
Where is this place? No, go ahead. Like, I feel administrative region that I've never heard of. The other day. Wait.
And you essentially put it over all because like it's a big facility. It would technology all the time.
What was
But
it?
now like we have to she like hates going outside. She like immediately wants to come back in.
That's not
Because she
their
gets
face,
very,
man.
like,
It's like the Vatican City.
Yeah. She days we had, we just sat there quietly. But now she's sort of.
I look, yeah, it's a bit of story.
She's eating, so she is biting everything, which is funny, but also not good. But it's funny. So you still don't know what to do. No one can just have to read a record. It's healthy. Not always.
So I wanted to just show you this briefly to kind of explain the two main things that are going on in outsourcing. And actually, there's an outsourcing, but not too far away. You have two trends that are kind of going against each other. So this kind of gives you an idea of the motives for doing the outsourcing. So remember, whatever your core functions are, whatever your particular kind of core competencies are, those are the kinds of things that you don't give up. And let us also say that company secrets are valuable, and extremely important. And that's also one of the reasons why a strong brand is vital to be able to come to your success. So the administrative and support processes, the information technology infrastructure does not have to necessarily be, all right, owned by you. Although we're finding more and more that maybe we should, especially with the increase of, or let's just say, the constant attacks by hackers, all right? So this basically shows you that from the in-house activities and the outsourced ones, that those particular things that you do, your infrastructure, your administrative and support processes, and your core functions of those things, you see them gradually being pushed downward. So one of the things that I was just being on the cusp of when I was getting into IT was information or medical office information systems. Now, doctors are great for medicine, but lousy as business people. And that's to expect because you focus on your core things and you do nothing else. It requires you to invest time in having a good office structure because nothing gets done until it gets built, all right? So one of the things I was working with this corporation in the 90s was what they would do is they took over all billing. So if you go to any of the doctor's offices that you see now, what you're going to find is that all of the office environment things, the accounts payable especially, are done by a third party. So how do they do it? So all of the bills, all the statements online, all right, and the information technology infrastructure is owned by another corporation, and that other corporation is where all of the billing information is entered in. It's also, by the way, where your x-rays and everything else are. It's all now on the cloud so that those things can be shared as well. What happens with the doctor's offices is that at the end of the month, they receive a check automatically for all the accounts receivable, less 15% to 10%. Which means that they're making money hand over fist, the doctors are, because they're getting the one thing that they need, which is their money, all right? And it means that the office systems are earning 10 to 15% on whatever the doctors are making. It's a win-win situation. Both groups are doing what they consider to be their specialties. So I just kind of want you to touch on that. Those things, it's important to understand, and when you do your cases, just remind yourself, what are those specialty things that the corporations do that make them valuable? Those are not the things you share, but as much as you can, everything else, you allow someone else to do. And let me just go over one other idea. So I get daily briefings, and this was one of the ones that we were talking about nearshoring. So here's actually nearshoring, not with the United States, but with Mexico, all right? Because manufacturing is worldwide now. What Mexico feels is that their particular competencies, they want to keep in as well as themselves. And so they've created a structure inside of Mexico that allows them to keep their particular manufacturing inside of Mexico itself. Because let's face it, if one individual, here we go back to the original concept, if one corporation can make the same thing as another corporation, it all comes down to which one costs more is how, corporations are going to decide who makes it. And so nearshoring, NAC is a natural concept that just takes that. So It's one of those trends in place that has found itself again, not just in the United States, but other locations. And once again, place is the most expensive. Price is the least expensive to change. Place requires hundreds of individual interactions between corporations, and once changed, it's very difficult to change back. All right. So the last thing we're going to talk about in this particular chapter is integrated marketing communications, which in the old phrase was advertising. So that's what IMC means now, right? You take a class and you're specializing in advertising. Advertising has to do with the ability to focus a message, and the message needs to be changed, especially when it comes to unique places and ideas. So what is IMC? IMC is the strategic and coordinated use of promotion to create one consistent message across multiple platforms to maximize their persuasive impact. Put it out there. In the modern concept, it also means that we have to consider all of the contact points with the consumer. Bless you. All of them. Okay. And it also means the influencers as well. That message must be consistent and it needs to be uniform. Which, given the multiple ways in which consumers receive messages, can be very problematic. There are three models for integrated marketing communication. If we were to take all of the unique medias it boils down to three. The first model was known as the one-to-many. One-to-many. This could also be considered the traditional form of advertising. This is where a single message is crafted and delivered to multiple clients across different media. Single message a single message, sorry, single message that is crafted, um, and delivered to multiple clients across different media. This is the traditional form of advertising. It is called the one-to-many. And so the media can be broad or it can be mass market. It can be specialized audiences. But what it means is that a single message is crafted for those particular media and for larger audiences. They tend to be mass informed, okay? They tend to be large audiences. They tend to be broad and not specialized. And not customized. And by that, I mean not, well, let's see, not changeable, I guess is the way to say it. So in essence, it is in one direction. All right? Which I should put down. One direction. It goes from a central hub, goes directly to the consumer. It is shared across the platform. And generally, it's left up to the consumers to interpret what the message means. Because if I have 50 million individuals that I'm sending a single message to, given the frame of reference of those individuals, it can be difficult whether or not they understand it or not. A frame of reference is extremely critical. So I taught at Spring Hill, and Spring Hill is a Jesuit college. And so there were actually nuns, two sisters from Vietnam. And this was their first experience in the United States. Had been there for about 6 months. And so it was in the spring, and like generally in every advertising class, you talk about Super Bowl commercials. And so has anyone seen the Godfather scene in the bedroom with a horse?
Yeah.
Okay, you know what I'm talking about, all right?
Yeah.
So the that particular year, they did a scene like that with a Mercedes owner who lifts up the sheets, and it's the hood of a Volvo, and he starts screaming, okay? And afterwards, they asked me what it meant. And it kind of realized, if you haven't seen that and you don't understand that culturally what it means, then you have no way of making a connection, all right? What does a white flag mean? Surrender, yes. If you show something and, well, there was an advertisement of germs on a table with waving a white flag, but if you don't know what the white flag means, you know, you don't understand. What does a checkered flag mean?
Finish line.
What's that?
Finish line.
Finish line, the end of a race, absolutely. It's a symbol, and if you don't understand the symbols that you're using, then there's the difficulty, and there's one of the hard parts of mass advertising, is that mass advertising, in order to reach everyone, has to have a frame of reference that everyone understands. The next one, right over here, is what's known as the one-to-one. All right? And in the one-to-one model, it is a single message delivered to a single customer. All right. And so over here on the one-to-many, the medias tend to be TV. We used to call it RTF, radio, television, and film, RTF, okay? Also, of course, you can look at anything online, okay? YouTube, all of these, although the influencer is kind of a unique place, and we'll talk about them. But the one-to-one is a single message delivered to a single customer. And then this also tends to be under personal selling. And it's also under human resources as well. And, oh, what is the, not human resources and, gosh, public relations. Public relations may be one of the most vital one-to-one delivery systems that we have. If you're in PR, I mean, you have a very vital, important piece of the whole puzzle of your particular corporation. Public relations. Personal selling has enormous advantages. You can, with personal selling, you can overcome objections. At the moment of concern. You can craft the message. To the audience. Okay. Along with objections, that's also questions as well. But the disadvantage, it is the most expensive form of all marketing communications. Yet, our undergraduate personal selling classes are booked out. Every one of the the students that have gone through our personal selling classes had a job before they got out. 16%, was it? 10 to 16% of the GDP in the United States is spent on personal selling. And I would also argue that in a time of automated and AI, I think the personal touch becomes more valuable than ever. Yes.
I'm talking a little bit more about how human resources is a form of one-to-one marketing.
Yes, because your individuals who work for your company may be the most important marketers that you have. All right. How you treat your people inside your corporation may very well speak whether you have success or failure with your particular corporation. You know, treating people right. Yeah. My mother used to say, how you treat your family is how you treat company. All right. And so that's why human resources is a vital, important part of personal selling. Because marketing is holistic in nature. Everyone in your organization is a marketer, and how we treat the people in our corporation determines many times how our consumers perceive us. Because there ain't nothing worse than a dishonest employee. Okay. I mean, oh my gosh. So that's why human resources, we kind of think of personal selling and public relations to be the more important ones, but HR has become more and more valuable as time goes on. That's why, you know. So treat your employees right, no doubt about it. Because once again, dissatisfaction and satisfaction are not bi-directional. You know, satisfaction of employee is one thing, dissatisfaction is another, right? It can strap your corporation, especially when it comes to vital individuals that can make your organizations succeed or not. Okay. The lifeblood of any organization is the people that work for it. Good question. Okay. So the one-to-one model, we have the one-to-many, we have the one-to-one, And the last one that we have, the Brave New World. Is many to many. This is where multiple individuals craft messages to other individuals okay? And so, of course, here is where we have social media. And I would say all forms of social media in all different platforms, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, all of them are considered under this banner. The many to many, as I've said, is, I shouldn't say the Brave New World because we're 20 years into it now. And the thing about the many to many, of course, is that it has been with us far longer than just the communication devices in which we use. A lot of the way to think of the many to many model is the individuals where you would just gossip over a fence about the days going on. That's an example of the many to many. Now, of course, the difficulty with the many to many model is that the communications go on within the individuals themselves, and each individual puts their own particular, crafts their own message in their own unique way. And we can understand the disaster that can happen, you know, when people eventually talk about those particular things. And the biggest disaster, of course, is that disgruntled ones in the many to many model spread like acid, okay? And it is so easy to get the message away from you, but unfortunately, that's the real world nowadays, okay? So. It's also important to understand when we talk about this is to understand consumers' perceptions about what they trust, all right? So if I were to put a timeline in here, I'm gonna erase something over on the other side. I'll do it here. When you're thinking about integrated marketing communication, and of course, the many to many model is here, but when you're trying to craft a unified message across the one-to-one, the many-to-many, and to the one-to-many, you have to deal with a concept also of trust and control, all right? And so, if we have the one-to-many message here, and we have the many-to-many on the other side, and the one-to-one to be somewhere in the middle, here are two things that we have to deal with, okay? So, the concept of control. So, most control is on this side, and the least control is on this side. And so the maximum control is the one-to-many, and the least to none is in the many-to-many side. The one-to-one is somewhere in the middle, because remember that with the one-to-one, we have individual responses, okay? The personal seller is also a unique place because they are what's called the boundary spanners. And so they stand between the individuals that they're trying to sell to and the corporations in which they work for. And so there's a translation that goes on between what the consumer desires and what the company wishes to give. And so you have control in that, especially if you have very, very good training to your salespeople, but ultimately you're depending on the trust of those individuals. And so control most on one side, and in the many to many, you have the least. However, let's also add another line here. That's called trust. Right? On trust, the least trust that the consumer gives is in the one-to-many model, because quite simply, the consumer understands that it is the corporation that is crafting the message. So there was a marketing researcher who answered in 1957 the question that said, is advertising propaganda? And the answer to that is yes. The word propaganda means a single opinion on a given idea. Propaganda means the single opinion on a given idea. And in essence, it's all propaganda. But what protects the consumer is the consumer understands that advertising is propaganda and puts it in its proper context. Or let's just say the informed consumer does. And so, yes, it's propaganda, but you understand its purpose. And so, that jaundiced view that consumers have, we accept that, yes, it's propaganda, so what's your problem? Okay. On the other side, although you have the least control, you have the most trust when it comes to the many-to-many model. Because in the many-to-many model, no one single individual controls the message. Now, the question also comes in here is, where do influencers go? So, influencers. So there's a guy I like to watch on YouTube, a bunch of them. One of them is called Scotty Kilmer. Scotty Kilmer is a guy who works on cars, old-fashioned dude, been around forever. By the way, if you're wondering how much money you make on YouTube, so just from advertising generation alone, generally, or if you have 1 million subscribers, you make about 65,000 a year. That's kind of the general location where it's at. Scotty has about 6 million subscribers. So figure out how much Scotty makes. Scotty makes enough money that he hires his son to be able to edit his videos. So every day he's got a video going on the weekend, he does some car talk. So that's an example of where an influencer is. Scotty is very much trusted, and Scotty, I would put somewhere up here in an independent influencer is somewhere here. Scotty takes no money for advertising. If he finds a product, he tells everyone. If he finds a bad product, he tells everyone. He can be a advocate for people. He hates service departments for not private, not private mechanics, but like your standard kind of Toyota place or anything like that, and I won't mention names. His particular point is that, and this is true, over 50% of the money that is made at a franchise automobile dealership is made from service. So, I mean, that's their point about how they make money. So he has some very, very bad opinions on them. True thing happened. This person bought, I forgot the name of the car in the dealership, but it was in Texas. And they had a accident or no, excuse me, something was fundamentally wrong with the car. They told them that they were gonna have to spend $50,000 to get it fixed. Scotty sent this message out through all of his subscribers, and the next day they said, we'll fix it for free. So do they have power? They do. So his influence is strong because he is independent. However, on the other end, there is the shill. Okay. And so what is a shill? A shill is an influencer who basically shills for another corporation. So in other words, they're a maven. Okay, so a marketing maven is an individual who hawks for a particular corporation. And once again, because, you know, advertising is propaganda, we recognize it as propaganda. And so the very first thing we ask ourselves when we're looking at YouTube videos is, are they independent or are they a shill? Okay. So you can't say influencers are in one place or another. It all depends on whether or not they have some form of independence. Okay. So this is the broad spectrum of integrated marketing communications, how it falls in those particular areas, and ultimately how we have to think when we're trying to design a strategy to put together those particular groups. Okay. So how do we appeal? The most common method is using, bless you, which is called the AIDA model. AIDA. The AIDA model. In order to be able to spread our message to consumers, the first thing we have to recognize is the consumers have to know we exist. And so the first purpose of any good marketing message is to get their attention. And how they do it can be in many different ways. So the Mini Cooper. Mini Cooper actually used to be a British designed vehicle. Mini Coopers are actually built by BMW. I'm not sure you know that, under a different brand name. The Mini Cooper was known for its eccentricities, like every British vehicle is known for. It had the wonderful heating that a German vehicle would have. It had, you know, all the eccentricities about its favorite time to drive is in the middle of a rainstorm, when the lights wouldn't work. So anyway, going on. They had a lot of things that they had to combat, but one of the things that they wanted for the Mini Cooper is to increase the cool factor, all right? Because that was important. So they started a series of what's known as guerrilla marketing, which is not using the traditional models for advertisement, but what they wanted to do is bring things that brought attention. And so one of the things that they did was they put them in shopping malls across the United States on a pole, just like a horse riding would be. And they would give you a token and you could sit inside the Mini Cooper, just like you could ride a hobby horse. And that was one of the ways that they started spreading the attention. They would drive around in a big Chevrolet Suburban, put the Mini Cooper on top and say, I have this for my weekends, okay? And it generated a sufficient buzz, became unique, and then people, once they got their attention, they started expressing their interest. And so once you have an interest, that's when the consumer starts the information search to be able to find out more about that particular item. And then you started to see people, eventually it becomes desirable. Because once you grab an individual's attention, what you hope to do is find them in a unique situation that promotes the use of that particular item, all right? The interest creates a desire. The hoping or the need to think that you might actually want that, and then finally you have the call to action. Now, what a lot of advertisers will do, especially when you've got a new product, is you hopefully try to bypass all of this and you go directly to action, and this is where you have samples. Okay? Because if I have a sample, the consumer bypasses all of these things and goes directly with trial. Samples bring trials. Everybody tries something on the first time, and you don't get a second chance at a first try, okay? There's an old saying, you don't get a second chance at a first impression. You gotta make the first one the best. This is where I discussed last week when I talked about when Gain came out, because Gain was having to do something that was fundamentally different, and that was to have consumers use liquid detergent for their laundry. Light beer, okay? When light beer came out in the 60s and 70s, all right, one of the things that beer was going up against is the difficulty that light beer or low calorie beer was considered to be for whom? Yeah, exactly. And 2/3 to 3/4, it's still to this day, 2/3 to 3/4 of the beer drinkers in the United States are men. Just that simple. And so light beer had that difficulty in this action phase to grab interest and attention. And so they fought against a monumental difficulty. How do we get low calorie beer to the predominant drinkers? And so what light beer did was they came up with a ad campaign, which was one of the greatest of all time. So first thing that they did was I identified light beer drinkers with the most rugged men that they could possibly come up with, and those are former football players. And basket, in sports, let's just say that in general, because it's starting to spread. They can't do current ones because there are laws against having current athletes promoting substances like that. Anyway, so they put them in places where they were drinking beer, and they changed the message, all right? They changed the message from low calorie to less filling. So if it's less filling, what does it mean? Yes, you get to drink more beer. How bad can that be? Okay? Yes, okay? But they had to do something that was vital to tell you that you're just not having watered down beer. They had to anchor it with the original concept that it still tastes great, all right? And so they came up with two phrases, okay? Tastes great, less filling, and came up with the phrase, everything that you want in a beer, which is to signal category membership, it's a beer, and less. And so that became its success. And they were able to get past this, especially with the attention part, when you got to see your former favorite football players, and it gave you an interest for trying. You say, well, what the hell? And you drank, and that's why beer became so successful. So the ADA model needs to be worked on in order to be successful. So I'm going to talk about promotional goals, and then we'll go for the day. We'll finish this tomorrow. But I talked about the push strategy and the pull strategy, and these are the two ways that you get goods through the system. So in the push method, once again, let's think channels because channels is how we do things, all right? The manufacturer in the push strategy gives reasons to the downstream partners to do or to use their particular items. And so you have what are called manufacturers reps. They go ahead and push these particular items to their intermediaries. The intermediaries push those particular items to the retailers, and then the retailers push those particular items finally to the consumers, and that's what a push strategy means. Push strategy generally comes down to personal selling plus sales promotion. Sales promotion is advertisement. Sales promotion is advertisement. To get sales within a particular date. And we'll talk about this later, but I just wanted to hit you what sales promotions are. So you have get incentives to try this particular item, perhaps in a one use, ultimately to be able to provide that, to provide the use of it. And so this is how push works. Pull strategies are when the manufacturer advertises directly to the consumer and the consumer pulls those goods through demand through the system and creates the desire. You pull those goods through the system, and this is where advertising and public relations and all those other things come in. Now, the first great example I can give of the pull strategy in a normal push environment has to come down to this little blue pill that I know nothing about, okay? Okay, so the very first started was this idea that you could take a pill and you could enjoy the whole weekend, okay? So, like I said, I have no idea what it means. But this was an idea that you could go directly to the consumer in 3 golden words, which were ask your doctor, all right? And of course, doctors who are wanting to be able to see more clients and patients said, sure, why not? And the rest is history. And in a environment where pool never existed, we find that it exists quite handily. And so now here we are with the purple, well, not the purple pill, but the blue pill, but a bunch of other pills as well. And so we're happily medicated forever. Okay, so we're done. We'll finish on Tuesday, and then we'll start. Y'all have a good day.